Water scarcity, a constant threat for societies everywhere.
Cape Town could run out of water by late April.
The water crisis worsens in part of New South Wales. Authorities are having to prioritise human needs over the environment.
We have to understand there is a finite amount of water on the planet.
Water shortages are pushing cities to adapt and to discover solutions for water management.
There's one brilliant thing about a water market, and the rule is if somebody wants more, they have to work out who gets less.
Nature's solved all its problems long ago. All we've got to now learn is how to work alongside nature and understand the processes of nature.
When there is a drought or dry season, this plant can immediately abstract seawater and convert it into drinkable water.
In an era of increasing unpredictability, how could water be managed so supplies are secure?
The world has to turn green. It's not going to succeed unless we have a blue revolution, unless we change fundamentally the way we manage water.
Whatever you want to bring that's positive into a crisis, you have to have built it before.
The race is on for new ideas to harvest water, to manage it, and to make every drop count. Because the quest for water security never stops. The island city-state Singapore is known for a number of notable achievements, one of which has to do with the very resource that's critical for sustaining life and cities.
When you put a lot of people in a small space, you build a city essentially. It's about providing food and water and basic services to them. And as that population expands, there need to be solutions to that delivery. And so this is an issue that's been true in Singapore for 200 years.
Stamford Raffles, who bought the swampy island of Singapore in 1819 for the East India Company.
Securing sustainable water supplies was key to the island's development. It was also an important criterion for the city's colonial founder.
Raffles did not come alone. Several ships came with him. Crew members surveyed Singapore and many of the surrounding islands. And the key element in his reports was the search for drinking water. And what he showed was that Singapore had several places that could provide good drinking water.
Within mere years after its founding, Singapore blossoms into a thriving entrepot, attracting migrants and merchants the world over. As the city developed, water supplies grew scarce.
Once we reached about 100,000, that was about the limit for the natural water supply, the wells, the springs, and so therefore they had to have different solutions. They had to use the technology of the day. And the technological solution of those days was to build reservoirs.
Singapore's first reservoir used to be called the Thomson Reservoir because Mr. Thomson planned it. However, improvements were made later by Mr. McRitchie, and the reservoir then took his name.
McRitchie Reservoir was chosen because it was at a height where there was enough of an incline that water could go into the town without the need of extra or a lot more pumping stations to deliver it.
But water from these catchments is barely enough. The city's population multiplies, fueled by growth in its economy.
The 19-teens, Singapore reached its limit, colonial limit, on where they could put reservoirs and what they could do. So the colonial authorities turned to Johor.
Hoeekid is a mechanical engineer by profession. He's also an avid hiker. Ho's hikes these days are hunts for a mythical creature he calls the water dragon.
This water dragon brings water all the way from Malaysia until it lands right here at Pearls Hill Service Reservoir. And in exchange for the water, guess what? The dragon gets the pearl.
Ho has made a hobby of chasing this dragon. The dragon being a 22-kilometer-long pipe that snakes across the city.
Well, this is what we call the dragon's back. Where you look at how it arches, right, with the spikes and so forth, it really looks like a dragon's back.
The idea to explore importing water from Johor came about as early as 1904. The source of all that water is Gunung Pulai, about 50 kilometers from Johor Bahru, a mountain 654 meters above sea level. The piped water flows from Pulai, through the state, crossing the causeway, through gravity, then snaking its way through downtown Singapore before arriving at Pearls Hill in Chinatown, a total of 80 kilometers from the source. The cost of the project, completed in the late 1920s, is 22 million Straits dollars. A sizable undertaking in its day.
Many people may not realize was that how amazing it is when this pipeline was built even before World War II. All these were just forests, and it was manual labor to lay the giant pipes all the way from urban area all the way to town. It was simply an amazing feat of engineering.
In the early 1960s, Singapore signed 2 water agreements with Malaysia.
Singapore has started work on a giant $40 million project to draw water from the Johor River at Kota Tinggi.
June 1961. A drought sweeps through parts of Malaya and Singapore. Water supplies from Johor are affected. In Singapore, authorities issue an urgent appeal to the public. Use less water till local water levels go back up. 2 years later, in 1963, another drought shocks water supplies again.
When I was very young, I already carried the water and filled the pots with water from the well.
This is a very big one, you can't find,
Memories, give us memories.
This wood cutting machine is very old. I think that this one.
James and Hong Eng were teenagers during the days of water rationing.
This is, in the old days, many people are using the standpipe for washing their clothes. So that's where, when during a drought, they will still lock up the standpipe.
So everything dried up, our ponds, our wells, and the grass and vegetables just died off like that, just like a barren piece of land, And so the kampong folk got to appeal to the government to give us water. Then the government would bring the water using a huge water truck, right, to the kampongs. And then the kampong folks would know what time the water truck would come and then line up the area with their pails and we'd just carry the water to our homes. So it was really very difficult for us.
We do away with bathing, with no shower. Yeah, because showering means use a lot of water. Yes. Our friends say, hey, your body very smelly because you never bathe. Then we say, oh, we have to save water.
Singapore has never had to activate another water rationing exercise since the 1960s. Water is so readily available now that it might be taken for granted. Not by these two.
If it rains, I would take out all the pail and line up along here to collect rainwater. So I use this water to water the plants all around here, as well as to flush the toilet. So in this way, we can save quite a lot of water.
In an era marked by unpredictability, water scarcity has become a constant threat for many countries and a stark reality for some. In 2018, a drought in Cape Town threatens a water crisis. It forces citizens to make every drop count, and authorities to think seriously about water management.
Projections are that the Western Cape will run out of water within 3 months. The question is, why has the region not been declared a disaster area?
Drought is currently crippling the Western Cape. The provincial government is looking at a number of measures to stop unnecessary water usage.
This will be a disaster above all disasters. No city in the world has had to deal with such a situation as the taps running dry.
In 2018, Cape Town confronted the consequences of a catastrophic drought, the worst in 384 years. Authorities contemplated the possibility of what they called a day zero when taps would run dry. If day zero were to happen, Cape Town would be the first major city in the world to run out of water.
It was quite a scary time for us, you know. It's like you're sitting with this small little baby and now there's this caution of that you might not have any drinking water. And I mean, it's like a basic necessity of life, you know, to have access to clean drinking water.
Ian Nielsen was deputy mayor at the time of the crisis.
The reality is that when you hit that sort of point in a drought, there's really only one option able to you, and that is to reduce consumption.
Day zero in the mother city is now expected on the 9th of July.
What we'd have had to do was to shut off the supply to individual properties. We would have had to create water collection points where people would have to come with their buckets or canisters to collect water. There would have been significant chaos. The objective wasn't just to not run out of water. The objective was also not to run out of money and not to destroy your economy.
Cape Town, which has seen its worst drought in a century, could run out of water by late April. What the so-called day zero would mean for the port city's tourism industry and its residents.
During the crisis, Councillor Xanthia Lindberg had an urgent task: to get residents in the habit of saving water fast.
When you're dealing with a very real crisis such as the drought and dam levels dropping week by week, it's important that your decisions are led based on information and data. Buy-in from the general public initially was incredibly difficult because we had to deal with a lot of frustration and anger. We slowly got residents on board under the key messaging such as Team Cape Town, working together towards a common goal.
Khayelitsha is the fastest growing township in South Africa. It's also one of the largest. Here, the majority of residents live in shacks. Many walk 200 meters or more to get water. Agnes Nokwandisa started a car wash 2 years before the crisis. Her way of creating jobs for youth living in her street.
Bekusokolisa amanzi. Ndaye ndabona into yoba mandothenga uJojo ne. Ndabe ndifumene lo Jojo. Ndalinda uba makudeske kuneimvula. Elaa xesha ke mos ke ndandingekazi ibhizinesi yam ayikekahambi kakuhle. Ndisebenzisa kakhulu amanzi esiwasebenzisa ngaphakathi wewashing.
We couldn't do any business because there was no water. Cars will turn here without being washed. And we lost a lot of employees. We lose the business, we lose some customers.
From the 1st of February, Cape Town residents will be limited to 50 litres of water per day per person. This is in a bid to reduce consumption.
The city's communications team needed to build confidence fast. There was already a growing mood of anger and panic.
So when the campaign first started, there were sort of practical tips. Already by this stage, it says top ways to save water indoors because we weren't allowed to use water outdoors. There was no filling your pool, there was no watering your garden.
We're asking people to use only 50 litres per day. And it was showing exactly how much your dishwasher, 9 litres of water you should be using. So it was giving a guide to say how you can stay within the framework of 50 litres per person per day.
We couldn't avoid negative reaction. There's no way that a community facing that level of disaster will be happy about increasing tariffs and having to reduce their usage. You can't keep everyone happy all of the time in a situation like that. So we gave help. We tried to express it in a very honest way. We're in this situation. These are the implications for everybody. Wealthy, poor, race, creed, class, no one wants a city of 4 million plus people to run out of water.
The city of Cape Town has just escaped the clutches of a 3-year drought, which managed to avoid so-called day zero.
Day zero never came. Cape Town prevailed. The crisis also spurred Cape Townians to make serious plans to avoid running out of water in the future. At the edge of town, one facility contributes to that mission. It's called the Water Hub, and it works on solutions to reclaim water.
We're standing on an old abandoned wastewater treatment works, and so that provided us with an opportunity to use what we call nature-based solutions to try to deal with the runoff that is coming from an underserviced informal settlement.
Funding grew for the Water Hub after the Day Zero episode. The city urgently needs water management solutions, especially ones that are affordable and easy to deploy in South African conditions.
We've got this water of very poor quality now entering into an agricultural river, a river that's used for irrigation and eventually flows into the Berg River, which is the main source of water, supplying this entire catchment and also the city of Cape Town's water as well. So it's a massive opportunity for us to try and experiment with how to treat this water without adding chemicals, without adding more energy, and one in which could be rolled out easily. Water is dangerous, and seriously dangerous if you don't know what is in it. So this is really an example of how we've tried to understand how best nature works.
The Water Hub has 6 biofiltration cells. Biofiltration processes make use of bacteria to break down nutrients. Other treatment processes include the absorption and containment of harmful bacteria, pesticides, endocrine disruptors, drugs, and pharmaceuticals. Each cell, 1 meter deep, is filled with a different natural element to study which combination works best. Then the water is used for multiple experimental purposes.
I'm going to examine one of these carrots here. This is grown from municipal water, and this section here comes from the biofilter. And this is a really important step in terms of understanding what kind of uptake we have in our biofilters and whether it's safe to actually irrigate like this.
There's fish in the system too. Their health is monitored to assess the quality of water treated by the biofilters.
Big centralized systems, they're not going to be the long-term solution. We've got to find how nature-based solutions can provide opportunities, work, employment, food security at a local level, and to motivate people to participate in that kind of activity.
In the wake of the Cape Town water crisis, Peter Willis co-created the Cape Town Drought Response Learning Initiative. Willis documents observations, insights, and reflections on the crisis, using in-depth filmed interviews with individuals across a range of sectors.
There is no social mechanism for learning out of a disaster. You get through the disaster the best you can, and you're so relieved that you just get on to normal life again. And I thought, no, we must be able to do better than that. We're going to have to face crises over and over, and every crisis brings its own novelty and surprises. For me, one of the biggest learnings was whatever you want to bring that's positive into a crisis, you have to have built it before.
Different conditions inspire different approaches to solving water scarcity. Elsewhere, recurring dry spells are the impetus for adopting a less conventional approach to determine the access to water. The Australian countryside. Wide open spaces and farmlands as far as the eye can see, all bathed in glorious sunshine. But that sunshine has gotten much stronger in recent years.
As the drought deepens, a dire warning has been issued for Australia's food bowl, the Murray-Darling Basin. Without rain, authorities are expecting more fish kills, environmental destruction, and town water supplies to run dry.
As the water crisis worsens in part of New South Wales, authorities are having to prioritise human needs over the environment. The Macquarie River is set to run dry in some places.
Even for a country like ours, well familiar with drought, the dry spell right now in Queensland and New South Wales is one of the worst in our history.
Scarce water supplies spur the country's lawmakers to adopt a different way of controlling access to water. Farmers in some Australian states have to buy water in a water market. Water is traded as a commodity and sold to the highest bidder. Joe and Don Hearn run a 20-acre farm in New South Wales. They've been farming here in a region known as the Murray-Darling Basin for the last 25 years. And they've enjoyed good harvests, until about a decade ago.
In the early 2000s, legislation came through which separated water ownership from the land. All of a sudden, it meant that people were able to own water, and so a temporary water market was established. And in the drier years, the price of water on that temporary water market goes through the roof. We cannot actually afford to buy water. We went from, excuse me.
So yeah, we had to basically sell off 60 beautiful, healthy cows to slaughter. One of the worst things we've ever had to do on the farm, choosing who stays and who leaves.
And unfortunately, it is a very negligent distribution of water that is going on now.
The Murray-Darling Basin is managed across 4 states and a territory, covering an area of more than 1 million square kilometres. The length of the basin is almost 1,400 kilometres from its source, the Warrego River in Queensland, to the headwaters of the Goulburn River in Victoria. Economist and water policy expert Michael Young helped design plans for the Murray-Darling Basin water market.
What's the value of water? There's no such thing really as value because it depends on so many things. My intent in setting up a water market was to think through how to resolve difficult arguments over the allocation of water. Who gets to use it? Who doesn't get to have it? There's one brilliant thing about a water market, and the rule is if somebody wants more, they have to work out who gets less. And markets do that.
The water market gives access to the highest bidder. But when a drought happens, things get messy. After the water is channeled for environmental and human needs, farmers are left with what remains. Permanent crop growers typically have a good chance of getting at least some of their water entitlements. But seasonal crop growers would have to go with less, even without any water, until conditions improve. A farmer might even decide to sell water that's allocated to him to traders to stay afloat. The water market has created a new asset class and a new revenue stream for brokers like Lex Batters.
The way the system works is a buyer or a seller decides what they want to do. Obviously, if they want to buy or sell water, they reach out either to a broker or they can log in and trade directly onto our exchange, where they enter that marketplace and they find a counterparty to the trade they'd like to do. So people don't physically transfer the water between each other. That transfer happens in communal storages, in government-owned storages. So at the top of the system, we have lakes and reservoirs where all the water is stored, and the transaction happens in that storage.
Farmers in drought distress are begging for help, accusing the federal and state governments of ignoring a looming crisis on the land.
Lloyd Polkinghorne is a farmer and current owner and editor of one of the oldest local newspapers serving the region.
The paper serves as a vital role when it comes to water advocacy and also telling the story about what's happening. We try to boil down and show the human side of it. So where we are here, we can see the daily sales, the volumes of water that are sold, and also the highest price per megalitre and the lowest price per megalitre. Several different apps, and I suppose that's one of the more confusing things about the changes that have happened. You have to be quite familiar with the smartphone and be able to do that, and I think that leaves some more traditional farmers behind.
It's a national scandal unfolding in secret. But while farmers are being sold down the river by the bureaucrats, not everyone's losing. Corporate speculators trading in water are swimming in profits.
Scott Hamilton drew from conversations with traders and farming communities to write his book, Sold Down the River.
So we've got farmers and irrigators, on one side of the trade, and generally they've got relatively poor computing and systems on one side of the trade. Now, on the other side of the equation, we've got these high-speed traders, the Wall Street traders, and using the supercomputers that can trade up to a billionth of a second, immediately getting the best opportunity that they possibly can. So it's not a level playing field.
Some farmers are working together to try to level that playing field. Chris Brooks manages the Southern Riverina Irrigators Association. The association represents more than 2,000 farmers. They want the government to re-look the water market and address its impact on prices.
The best part about this region with the diversification in crops was that everyone was trying different crops, and a lot of farms would diversify into one or two, so that if milk prices were good or grain prices were bad, they had an offset. And when water became expensive, none of them worked. It didn't matter what you were growing. And the economic impact of this region is massive. It just makes me angry because I just think it's the worst crime ever to be inflicted on people of this country, to have national water management so badly managed.
So we've seen this massive shift of water being used for a variety of use, the staples of our food bowl and our food system, to being used for almonds in a very big way. And that's because a lot of money can be made out of that.
Water scarcity, it is always a large problem. Everyone with an interest in water always wants a greater share.
Mick Keogh runs the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the country's chief competition regulator.
Australia, in earlier times, had a system whereby governments made all the decision-making, so they agreed how much water a farmer could have and sometimes told him what crop to grow. And that was a system that was open to political interference, the market deciding where the value is most generated from water is a better system than having governments try and decide that. They still set the absolute rules, but then the market sorts it out after that rather than having governments decree that.
Anybody can own water. Now, that's not just anyone in Australia. That could be any overseas investors. So that means that banks and hedge funds and pension funds can invest in water in Australia with having no connection to the water.
The world is facing a very, very serious water crisis, basically of two dimensions. One is ecological and the other is human.
Water is a key feature of many climate change conversations. In 2008, Maud Barlow lobbied for the UN Assembly's vote to pass a resolution to declare access to clean water and sanitation a human right. It was eventually passed in 2010 with an overwhelming majority.
There are two fundamentally different ways of looking at how to deal with the water crisis. On one hand are those who say commodify it, put it on the open market for sale like oil and gas and let the market take care of it. The other says no, it's a human right, and because it's a human right, everyone must have access to it, whether they can afford it or not, and therefore it must be held as what we call a public trust. It must be protected as a democratic right, like healthcare, like education. Water is a human right, but also a public service.
The commodification of water runs counter to water as a human right. And it's not just Australia that has a water market. In America, Lance Coogan formulated the first ever water index pricing methodology. Now, water is traded like oil and any other commodity on NASDAQ and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange.
Water is the most important asset class out there. Now, in these modern times, when we're trying to deal with climate change, how can you address the issue of water if you don't know its price? You don't know if it's expensive, you don't know if it's cheap, you don't know anything. How can you take a financial decision on something without knowing its price? You have to know its price. And what we're doing is showing the price.
Markets to trade water highlight growing fears of scarcity. They've also forced many to contemplate the value of the world's most precious resource. Elsewhere, scarcity spurs cities to accelerate innovation. Singapore, an urban metropolis limited in natural resources, including water. It could even end up as one of the most water-stressed cities in the world in decades to come. Singapore continues to import water. But the city has a water security strategy, and it's a holistic one. For a start, it closes the loop on its water supplies. New Water is the country's brand of ultra-clean water that's reclaimed from wastewater. It's emblematic of the Singapore water story. Now, there's a new twist to New Water. New Brew, a craft beer made from recycled water.
So water is a holy grail of brewing. An average beer would consist up to 95% of water. In order to make good tasting beer, you have to use good tasting water. Second one is purity. microbiological safety, and so on. The third one is mineral content. Working with new water from a technical standpoint, it's pure, it's clean, it's flexible.
Apart from recycling water, Singapore wants to increase its water catchment areas. The city has a network of rivers, canals, drains, and 17 reservoirs, making up 2/3 of Singapore's land area. The city's planners want even more. The plan is to harvest water in public housing estates with an urban water harvesting system.
We are now standing on top of the detention and harvesting tank. As you can see, the land on top is freed up for greenery. By locating the detention and harvesting tank underground, we are able to optimize the land space and also conserve water.
Water on the surface, along with water collected from rooftops, is channeled into an underground harvesting and detention tank. The water then gets treated in a central treatment room before it's stored and used for washing and landscaping. Up to 50% of water consumption can be saved for non-potable users. More public housing estates, including older ones, will have urban water harvesting systems. In the meantime, engineers work on harvesting water from another source, the sea.
This system here is the key to desalination plant. Here is the high pressure reverse osmosis system. The purpose is to remove the salt in the water.
The Keppel Marina East Desalination Plant is the first facility in Singapore that can treat both seawater and reservoir water. The plant will produce enough to meet 7% of Singapore's total water demand. It's also built underground, freeing up 20,000 square meters of green rooftop and community recreation space.
By processing water from the marina reservoir, the cost of producing drinkable water are much lower, all right? Now, when there is a drought or dry season, this plant can immediately extract seawater and convert it into drinkable water.
Despite Singapore's strategies to harvest as much water domestically as it can, it continues to depend on imported water from Malaysia. The existing water agreement, signed by both countries, is due to expire in 2061.
If you look at Singapore and what it has and doesn't have, it had to rely on its neighboring country to import water resources. But it has turned this so-called disadvantage into an advantage. There is an important contribution that Singapore is making to the global community.
Senior Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam co-chairs a major global initiative to spur changes in how the world values, manages, and governs water for the common good.
The world has to turn green. It's not going to succeed unless we have a blue revolution, unless we change fundamentally the way we manage water.
Singapore is contributing to that blue revolution. It's created a marketplace for ideas on water solutions, becoming a global hydro hub.
To be a hub, that means to have an environment, an ecosystem that is transparent and that has very clear rules. You work very closely with international institutions. It's not just the knowledge that comes with it, all the regulatory framework that envelopes this kind of setting.
There's also research to discover more efficient water treatment processes. One of the city's water treatment plants houses a validation plant designed to let researchers test new technologies.
The Smart Integrated Validation Plant, or IVP, we actively work with both private sector and academia to develop and commercialize various different innovation technologies.
One such collaboration involves Suez Water Technologies and Solutions, a leading player in the global water solutions sector, the Nanyang Technological University, and local water agency, the Public Utilities Board, PUB in short. They're meeting to review the performance of an experimental used water treatment system.
So I think in terms of, from Suez perspective, they are an experienced industry player, and we are benefited from their experience and their support in terms of the technical side.
There are many collaborations like these here at the Singapore Water Exchange, home to almost 30 companies from 10 different countries from around the world, each developing new solutions that could be applied at home and abroad.
The higher academic institute researchers bring in the fundamental research knowledge, whereas Suez Water Technologies and Solutions brings in the industrial operational background to the table and forms a nice symbiosis in order to deliver such research collaborative programs.
The Water Exchange is a landing pad for foreign water companies hoping to enter the Singapore market and to use the Singapore market as a base to explore the region. At the same time, it's also a launching pad for water startups and SMEs in Singapore.
Innovations coming out of the Water Exchange are urgently needed because by 2060, Singapore's water demand could almost double, with non-domestic users accounting for about 70%. Global Foundries is the world's largest independent semiconductor foundry. Semiconductor manufacturing is a water-intensive enterprise. But new tech makes it possible to reclaim and recycle water so that less is used.
In Global Foundries, we did some key projects. The first project is a centralized reclaim plant, which built in 2016-2017. And it has been around the cost of 20 million Sing dollar. And by doing this, we are having saving of new water, nearly 1.5 million meter cube per every year.
Another semiconductor plant in the city, belonging to Seagate, adopts ultra-filtration technology that saves about 3,000 cubic meters of water per day.
Identifying space for this wastewater recycling system was the biggest challenge that we encountered in this part of the project. And we are proud that our system is the largest wastewater recycling system funded under Industrial Water Solutions Demonstration Fund by PUB.
Here is the media manufacturing site. It's also the location where most water are being consumed. So it's critical that water are being recycled to the maximum. By having water being recycled within the equipment itself, it doesn't have to be transported and reprocessed again and being pumped back to the system. So overall, it cuts down energy as well as the space available for the whole process. And with our water saving initiative, it actually helped us to negate some of this cost increase, thus keeping Seagate in a very competitive manner while doing our business.
It isn't just industrial users who are working to save water, it's everyone. Targets have been set to lower the city's domestic water consumption nationwide, from 141 to 130 litres per person per day by 2030.
The Smart Water Meter program empowers consumers with data at their fingertips and to influence consumer behaviour to use water wisely. This helps them to save water and money in the process.
PUB makes the water usage data available via My Smart Water Meter account.
So I can see the day-to-day data for whatever I've used, everything is over here. Beside that, if I click on the more, this is the tips, how you can save the water. After using this app, right, I've saved 20% of the water usage.
Professor Lawrence Gota conducted an experiment. It's proof that users become more responsible water users when they have access to their consumption data in real time.
We find that providing feedback creates a habit. So when
The feedback is on, people use immediately less water. And then when we turn it off, part of that conservation effect still persists. Okay, so they still use less water than they used before the study. But then also we see that the muscle sort of gets weak over time. And people drift back to the behavior that they showed before the study. Helping individuals pay attention to water use, that's the key component here.
Water. It's the most abundant substance on the surface of the Earth. But clean water is becoming an increasingly scarce resource, with its value only made apparent in times of lack. The challenge to attain water security is an urgent and perpetual priority for nations across the world. Differing conditions warrant different approaches, from markets to technology, to drawing lessons from nature, and even changing mindsets on consumption. A revolution is crucial to recognize the value of water and to mobilize attention and support, to develop solutions and actions that will preserve access to water for everyone, everywhere. That blue revolution is in the making.